This is the Joint Planning and Zoning Committee and Special Call Committee of the whole meeting for Wednesday, February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. We are just a few minutes after 3:30, and the meeting is hereby called to order. The approval of the past meeting minutes, did everybody have a chance to peruse them?
Yes.
Do we have a motion?
Go ahead.
Second.
Yeah, so motion, but I did want to make a correction. So I don't know if this is right or not, but they're at the top of the minutes for the November 8th, 2023 meeting. It's the committee members as us. But we
And back then, it should have been
yeah, it was Tate Woods.
Dayton Woods. Okay. We'll get that fixed.
But otherwise, it looked good.
Okay. We'll get the members fixed. So we'll approve it as amended. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So the minutes are approved with the change of the membership list. On item 3, we have one zoning case, CAC 2023-00013. So who's presenting?
I'll introduce, if that's okay with you guys. I'm Kim Spurl. I serve as the city zoning administrator. And this is proposed amendments to the city zoning ordinance to revise Chapter 6, our landscaping, buffering, and screening chapter. And here to share our amendments with you is our landscape architect, Lauren Havard.
Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Havard. I serve as landscape architect for the city. Thank you for letting me present to you today. Hopefully we can, go through all the proposed changes to the landscape ordinance and, it keeps switching back and forth. Sorry. So the landscape chapter of the zoning ordinance was originally written in 2015. Hasn't been updated since then, so just over the past 9 years, we've seen some opportunities to make it a little bit easier to use, make more sense, and a little easier to follow. So these are the main updates that we made. We added a definition section, encouraged the use of native plants and green infrastructure, added spacing standards for utilities, added a tree protection plan, and along those lines, Councilor Abbott, you had mentioned the definition of a replacement tree. Just could a homeowner just replace their tree if they need to? And yes, they could. This refers to the section about tree protection plans. So if there's a tree that's a quote-unquote qualifying tree, that's kind of a larger tree that a developer is looking to save on site. And so if they remove that, that's bigger than just a typical, 6-foot-tall kind of smaller tree that they might plant at the time that they're developing it. So if they remove one of those larger trees, we're going to want for them to put back a larger tree or come to some sort of agreement with the city that they'll supplement what they have taken out with an equal option.
Yeah, I understand that part, but it says a tree that's been removed for any approved reason, and I'm thinking about the miscreant who sends some guy with 10 teeth and a chainsaw out to cut a city tree in front of his or her property because they just don't like it anymore. Mm-hmm. That's not approved.
That's
and those
correct.
are the people that, I like to turn in, but the city doesn't know what to do with them. So that's why we're going to have a tree ordinance soon. But it seems to me that we should say for any reason.
Okay.
Just I mean, does that mess anything up? Because if people do it without approval from the city,
We still want it to be replaced.
we want it to be replaced
Sure.
with a decent tree, and we
Absolutely.
want to, I mean, I don't mind if we don't fine them, if we just make them put in a significant tree that will get their attention.
No, I think that's a great change.
I'm sorry. Julie Bernard with the Office of the City Attorney, and I think this is where applicability comes in, which is, what I had, wanted pointed out about this. This is like about developments, and, when somebody comes in with a plan with the trees, and this isn't addressing city trees, public trees, that will be in the tree ordinance. So there's a separation here. So what's being discussed here about the qualifying tree and all of that is something separate from that issue.
I understand that.
Okay.
But if someone reads a
Yeah.
piece of our ordinance
Yeah.
and, they don't know that there's another piece just like it in another section, they might be confused. And I have seen developers take out perfectly good, wonderful trees without permission. So all this says is for an approved reason, which means that a tree that replaces a qualifying tree that's been removed for an unapproved reason is sort of just left out there in limbo.
Yeah. Well, is there something that it would be procedure for what's an approved reason, or they would have to come get approval to remove a qualifying tree on a site, or?
Well, if they're gonna change their tree protection plan, then they would have to submit that to us, so that's where we would say approved or unapproved if they can make their case. But
Just
I don't have,
it seems like replacement trees definition should be the same, like across everything, just to avoid the inevitable confusion that comes when you say something one way, one place, and with the exact same terminology, it means something different in another situation. So it seems like we could use language that just fits everything.
sure, I'm happy to strike approved and just have it be for any reason. I think that would be fine. Sure.
That makes me happy. Anybody object?
We also added the ability to request a waiver from certain requirements within the ordinance. In the chapter as it is currently, you have to apply for a variance to make any, to have any kind of relief from some of the requirements that we have. But in the new proposal, we offer a waiver, potentially a quicker process, just to help our residents. We also require compliance with the landscape standards by heavy industrial uses within 2 years. This portion of the ordinance, we've kept it, it's been in this chapter since 2015. At that time, we gave people 3 years. We never enforced it, so we had a meeting yesterday to excuse me, identify all of the places where heavy industry is adjacent to residential uses. So we're working on creating that list so that as soon as this, hopefully gets approved by council, we can send those letters out and get the clock started on that 2 years.
Okay, so that was another one of the questions I asked, was why we give them so long, but you're saying we're going to start making them have buffers between heavy industrial and residential, and we're giving them 2 years because this is going to be a surprise to them.
It shouldn't be a surprise, but it may be.
So, Counselor Abbott, in the 2015 updates to the ordinance, the language was in there to require them to come into compliance with the buffer, and they had 3 years. But, we've had some personnel changes and some other things that have gone through. COVID was a big one of them, and those letters never were sent out. And so what we'd like to do now, we're about 1/3 of the way through the neighborhoods with identifying those properties. And so our hope is that when this is adopted by council, we will have the letters ready to mail. If this committee thinks that we should reduce it to 1 year, we're open to that. We just reduced it from 3 to 2. We thought 3 was excessive.
It's easy to forget.
It is, and we will send reminders and keep track of the properties that come in and meet with us and comply with the requirements. They'll actually have to submit a landscaping plan as part of a building permit. So it will be reviewed and approved just like any other plans that come through the city.
But this will apply to existing heavy industrial.
It's all existing heavy industrial uses. So as you know, there are heavy industrial uses in light manufacturing and some other districts that are not zoned for that. They're what we would call legal nonconforming. But the way the language is written, it covers the use, not the zoning district, which we felt was important to protect the residences on either side of those property boundaries.
Well, I would really like a year, because why would it take them 2 years?
In reality, it shouldn't.
You know, you plant it and water it, pray over it, but why would you need 2 years to think about it?
We're definitely open to amending that if the committee would like to do that.
Yeah, I think giving them more time just, gives our staff more time to drop the ball.
Well, it's easy to get distracted.
It is.
It happens to me all the time, so, you know, it's just the way it works. But it seems to me that since our residents should be our primary focus, that getting them some relief from looking in the back of a, you know, industrial site out their backyard while they're barbecuing, I mean, I really think they deserve a break.
Right.
Bad
Yeah,
enough.
we'd be happy to reduce it to 1 year.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We also added increased landscaping required for residential uses. It was really kind of the bare minimum, and we bumped it up just a little, about 50%. Seems like a lot, but it was like, goes from 1 tree required to 2 trees required, so it wasn't a big change. We also added the requirement for foundation plantings for commercial developments. We increased the size of tree wells. It was 48 square feet. We increased it to 96 square feet just for the health of the tree. And those are tree well, they're not street tree wells. We'll address that in the tree ordinance. This is just tree wells like you would find in a parking lot or something. We also, Abraham created some new graphics for for the chapter to help. There was a lot of confusion when people were trying to, you know, kind of decode the existing graphics. So we updated them, and we think they're a lot easier to understand.
I agree. The ones with the big red X's were pretty bad.
Yeah,
So.
it was tough. And then to address one of your other points, we don't prohibit masonry walls in buffers. We just have made them so that they're not a requirement. It was masonry walls. I don't know that I ever saw a masonry wall used. And it created a hardship because if you don't include a masonry wall in your buffer, you have to have a much wider buffer. And so it was just a lot more of a development site. I mean, it's not a problem for me to have more, you know, a wider landscape buffer, but when, you know, you're getting down to feet and inches trying to fit things in, it was just a hardship that we were creating for developers. So we took out the masonry wall and just made it an opaque fence.
But they're not precluded, they're
No.
just not encouraged or
But they're not required.
required.
Yeah, I had a question about that. Let me see if I can find it in the document. I just looked at it just a minute ago.
sorry. It's gonna take me a minute.
Well, it's 38 pages, so you have a right to.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's this, basically it says, with the part that I'm thinking about, here it is. Page 262. It's page 22 of the document. Page 262 at the bottom. It says opaque fences, and then under that section, number 2A says fences provided in all buffers shall be constructed of natural wood. So it prescribes wood as the material to be used. So that tells me that you're excluding other materials.
We can change that to can or should.
Yeah. The other thing, relative to that is, I don't understand why we're striking some of the stuff provided that was in the previous version. Walls provided in buffer C and D may only be constructed of, all those materials. Walls shall not be constructed of industrial waste materials such as tires and pallets and that sort of thing. So help me understand why we're striking that out, why they were taking that out.
Which page are you on?
I'm same page, so under opaque fences on page 261. Make sure this latest version.
It's on the page before this table.
I found it.
Okay.
I'd gone too far.
Yeah, there it is.
So we could,
So I've definitely, let me just tell you my personal experience. I've definitely seen people attempt to use industrial waste materials to build fences. And I can imagine that somebody could take a pallet apart and use those materials in a creative way to make something that's visually appealing. In practice, that's not what they do.
sure.
So, I think it's something that folks, you gotta
Yeah.
account for things that people are gonna try to do. And this is something that, I've definitely, not frequently, but, definitely seen that happen before. So, I'm just wondering why we're taking that out.
Yeah, no, that's a good catch because we struck that line because it referenced the masonry walls. And so we just took it out saying we're not going to require masonry walls, but we do need to add some of this language back in to exclude those types of situations. So
Right.
that's a good catch. We'll add that back in.
Well, and to allow, like if you wanted to have a wrought iron fence, that's metal, but it's not sheet metal.
Right.
And if you wanted to have, the manufactured plastic coated fence, which looks very nice. I mean, I don't think we should limit ourselves just to wood. We just don't want people using scrap,
Sure.
because those pallet fences are pretty hideous. You can paint American flags on them, but it doesn't help. So, when you took out B, which was the walls in buffer C and D, the materials went with it.
Right.
Right.
No, that's a
And
good
brick,
catch and we'll add that
stone,
back in.
stucco, split face block, some of it actually looks good. So maybe y'all could just fix that and send
Sure.
it to us.
Absolutely. And then the excuse me, the last thing that we updated was our plant list. We took out some species, we added some species. We also put in a link to, my mind just totally went blank, to like, exotic invasives, and just said, we're not gonna allow these. But that list is ever evolving, so we wanted to include the link instead of making a list so that we don't have to continue to update it.
Yeah, you took out hackberries.
We did.
Thank goodness.
So if you have any questions, I'd love to entertain those, but it really, we didn't make, it seems like we made a lot of changes, but we didn't change a lot of the meat of the ordinance, just made it a little bit easier to use.
Does anyone have any questions? I did have one other that I sent in, was the one about the definition of professional, and you didn't actually have to be one.
That's right.
And I was wondering, like, could we say something about a professional that made them seem like they were professionals instead of just people who went into business? Because if somebody just goes into business and they don't know what they're doing, they're not a professional.
Right.
I mean, they might own the company, but they would be incompetent people owning a company. So I didn't want to call them professionals, so we can just call them something else. An entrepreneur. It seems to me that there should be requirements, like by education or experience or something that would make you a professional.
And yeah, actually, I found this recently. The state code has a definition for what a professional is, and it's basically requires something like 3 years of formal education or something, and some sort of degree or certification under the definition of what the state calls a professional.
Yeah, we struggled with this a lot because we wanted to put requires a landscape architect to stamp your plans and things like that. But Julie, I don't know if you have that pulled up, but you go ahead and read it.
Because we discussed that, there is a provision in there about, the plans, and again, we're talking about developments and large, things, not just what you're gonna do in your backyard next week where you've been living. This is how an area is gonna develop and be shaped. And so there's a provision in there, but there are exemptions from having to be a landscape architect, for certain work. And I was looking at that, and I don't know if some of this, we were talking about that because we just saw the comment before the meeting. But it includes, as far, from exempting from having to be a landscape architect, there are several other things, but the practice of planning is customarily done by regional or urban planners. So, that would be our staff reviewing plans and stuff like that, so that they don't have to be required to be landscape architect for everything to review plans. Practice of arborists, foresters, gardeners, home builders, and horticulturists, or the practice of any nurseryman, general, or landscape contractor, such practice to include design, planning, location, and arrangements of plantings or other ornamental features. So there are people who are in businesses who can do, and I think, maybe we can find something other than professional, but there are other practices that, are kind of included, a, nurseryman or general or landscape contractor who, is.
Maybe they could be landscape practitioners. Who knows what that means? But it's just, professional has a meaning in my mind that maybe it doesn't fit what other people are expecting, but I know some people who've gone into business that, maybe they used to work for a landscape company and they decided that they would just go into business on their own, but they really didn't know anything. And I don't want those kind of people to be look like the city is considering them to be professionals.
Sure. Just sure. Yeah,
So-
we'll work on that.
Just-
Just use some of what Julie had and, yeah,
Yeah, Julie has all the legal words
it's good.
that we need to use, but anyway, I thought the ordinance was really great.
Thank you.
And, you know, my little questions were just pretty much not much. So does anybody else have anything before we?
I do. I wanted to ask about the waiver process. So reading through that section on page 246, it says under that paragraph 1, you know, section B, granting of waivers, paragraph 1, it says, the granting of such relief shall comply with all of the following standards, and then it lists the standards. Am I missing a reference to stormwater management? So what I'm concerned is that, if you grant a waiver, the waiver doesn't release the developer from their responsibility to, do things such that they don't create any additional stormwater problems, you know?
Sure.
Like, it still keeps them in compliance with, stormwater standards. So I didn't see that in, you know, that listing, the granting of such relief shall comply with all of the following standards. I didn't see stormwater as one of those standards listed.
So ideally, the waiver process would occur while the plans are going through the permitting process. So the stormwater would still have to approve, you know, evaluate and approve their plans regardless of what the waiver was, whether they comply or they don't comply,
Okay,
whether they apply for a waiver or don't apply for a waiver.
so it's part of the review process in
It
general?
is.
They're gonna have to get a separate stormwater permitting.
It's a civil construction permit that they would have to get for stormwater, but we'd be happy to add, if you've read the subdivision regulations, that's kind of where we stole some of this section from. And we can add a number 6 about that it can't be detrimental to the stormwater system, and that they still have to comply with the city's stormwater ordinances.
Right.
Absolutely.
I think that would be a good addition to add.
So help me understand, the waiver would be, if they meet all those standards, the waiver would be granted by staff. Okay, and if the staff, you know, makes a decision that they're not going to grant the waiver, the applicant can then appeal to the zoning board of adjustments.
That's correct.
We hope that that doesn't happen. We
Yeah, I
hope to be
hope
able
that
to
it doesn't
come.
happen too, because, the zoning board of adjustments tends to be extremely lenient and it kind of disregards some of the intent of their zoning ordinances often.
We hope we can come to a compromise that suits us and suits the applicant. So
My reservation is that, again, you know, that it's not always clear to me that the zoning board of adjustments has the same fervor of, honoring, you know, the intent of city code. So,
I think our goal in the waiver section, you know, if someone asks for a waiver to not have 10 street trees that are required, that's obviously a no-brainer for us. It's to allow some flexibility if they can fit 9, but maybe they're just missing one, but they could put one in another portion of the property that maybe it's not in the exact spot where it's required, but they're still going to demonstrate that they've met the overall goal of what we're trying to get them to accomplish on the site. But I do understand your comments about our zoning board. We are working with them to try and better understand the variance standards, which would be required for variance, as well as what's required for modifications and special exceptions. Our group is relatively new. Most of them have been on there less than a year. So we do appreciate y'all's patience as we work with them to try and understand the city codes and our ordinances.
Okay.
And I was going to add, I think that's, as we said, the zoning board of adjustment is the place to go for a variance or, relief from the ordinance. And, and that is to keep the whole zoning ordinance from being thrown out as unconstitutional. It's to have another, separate body that has a quasi-judicial capacity to keep, because when you write a zoning ordinance, although we narrowed down a whole lot onto queue conditions and things so that we basically are zoning every property in the city instead of doing what zoning really does, which is zone broad swaths of the city. When you do that, you can't know what every single piece of property in the area is. When you say, okay, this is going to be, a certain type of residential, it has to have a certain size lot and everything. Well, somebody goes in and subdivides, you wind up with odd lots and things like that. So that's why zoning boards of adjustment exist, is to keep that from being an unconstitutional taking of the property. Mm-hmm. So this was written for a waiver, and the idea here was instead of having every single thing have to go to the zoning board of adjustment for a variance if somebody didn't agree with the landscaping requirements of this. And I can see when we get into the buffers, because I know I've looked at I've been to some of those industrial properties in some of those areas. There's going to be places where we say you've got to have a buffer this big between you and this residential area. They're not going to have that kind of spacing to do, there's going to have to be some review and some adjustment to meet the intent of the ordinance to give a break to the residential uses on one side, but we can't say, well, tear down your warehouse to put, all of this stuff in. So I think that will work through some of that, and this is just to give it an easier process through an administrative appeal to have our professional staff looking at it, as Ms. Pearl said, to, hopefully work through a compromise as to what works for that property that staff feels still meets the intent of the ordinance and gets us where we need to be. My discomfort is administrative staff does not have the quasi-judicial immunity protection that the zoning board of adjustment or the city council has. It's my intent that whenever we've got some kind of administrative permit or anything, an appeal goes beyond staff. In this case, it seems the appropriate place is the zoning board of adjustment. It's essentially, and I think I haven't talked specifically with zoning staff because we've just worked through this the last, just recently, but you can also appeal a decision of the director of planning, engineering, and permits to the zoning board of adjustment. And this would effectively be that because administrative staff under the director's, supervision would be making decisions about it. So if we have to fight over a tree, if it's fighting over one tree or something like that, and staff doesn't see a place, this just gives another place to give a relief before they sue, a administrative person for violating their rights all over the place. So.
Yeah, I get
to me.
it. I just don't, want to get in a situation where, something that's more egregious than what you guys are describing. The developer simply doesn't want to comply, so he applies for a waiver to the ZAB and, goes up there and sheds some crocodile tears, and they feel sorry for him, and grant the waiver.
I think training,
Yeah.
we've got to, just working on that training piece.
Okay, thanks. My next question is in regard to the screening regulations. And it's specifically on page 248, paragraph G. Areas used for the temporary or permanent storage of inoperable or damaged vehicles shall be screened from properties zoned residential and from public streets by means of opaque fence or wall or a solid evergreen hedge not less than 6 feet in height. So, I think that's potentially problematic.
Okay.
That, you can imagine that when somebody installs a hedge, that it's not going to be solid. There may be a time period where it's not solid, plants can die, stuff can happen. And the other thing is that I think that people who are likely to have these types of operations are likely to have some type of barrier anyway, some sort of fencing, because they're concerned about people, coming onto the property to, steal parts and things off of inoperable vehicles. And also there's I like the idea of having a hedge in front of these properties, and that, we don't have what I've seen many times in the past is where, thank God, the property on Airport Highway, the 9 acres of, junk cars, finally went away, and the Stivers Ford is building this awesome new maintenance facility there. But if I remember correctly, they had just random panels of sheet metal arrayed around the property. That tends to be, in the past, it was a common solution to meeting the technical standard of what a fence was around these junkyards.
Sure.
So don't want that, but also don't want, this raggedy hedge. You can imagine that, people who are maintaining a junkyard, I don't know, they don't strike me as people who are particularly concerned about horticulture.
Sure.
They won't be trimming the hedge
Right.
to look like giraffes.
So, a couple of options. We could easily strike that addition and just have it be an opaque fence or wall. Alternatively, we could say, new developments for temporary or permanent storage must have an opaque fence or wall and an evergreen hedge.
Right. And I'll give you another thing that I'm thinking about is that
I'm sorry.
I live very close to CMC Steel in East Avondale. And for the past 20 years, they have had, a very tall hedgerow of magnolias that separates their storage yard from the adjacent residential community. It's a row of magnolias with a fence in front of it. Mm-hmm. And it's the neighborhood's been very pleased with that, and they basically did that not because they were required to do it, but because that neighborhood asked them to do it.
Sure.
So they're good neighbors. But I'm glad that they have the wooden fence there too. I don't think it would work as well if there wasn't, the solid barrier there as well. Again, they do have a problem with folks trying to steal scrap, to go around the corner down to 41st Street and sell it to the scrap buyer. So, I think it's something that they would do anyway. So I just wanted to point that out.
Sure. And Julie said we need to coordinate this with the junkyard ordinance to make sure that they.
Correct. We're inoperable or damaged vehicles, and there's also, generally it depends, but that would be in a definition of a junkyard. And there's also another city code provision that applies really kind of like to repair stuff. If they're kept for a certain period of time, they've got to be behind a solid or, non-transparent. We've had issues. The junkyard ordinance requires junkyards to have a solid or otherwise non-transparent vertical wall or fence, minimum height of 8 feet measured from ground level. And it talks about the entrances, exits. It says, unless the council may waive or modify the requirement of this subsection when it finds this at a particular junkyard that it is or will be adequately screened by natural objects, planting, fences, or other appropriate means so as to not be visible from adjacent public ways open to travel, and there's no adjacent residentially occupied land, or a fence of less than 8 feet in height or different type of construction will adequately screen the junkyard. And also, keeps trespasses by children and vagrants and rats and mice and whatever else is listed here. Or it may not be necessary if there's a railroad on the backside of it to have that opaque. So what we found years ago in trying to enforce the junkyard ordinance, and you get these, to try to meet that opaque fencing, they would get the chain link and put those plastic slats in it. Different things. Some of them have come up with the creative ways you've mentioned. We made some changes in the fence ordinance. As I recall, there were some changes made to standardize what kind of materials are acceptable for fences. So if somebody came in and said they're going to fence a junkyard and they're going to use old pallets or something like that, then it would refer back to getting the permit for a fence. And if that's not allowed material, then that would be. So we just need to make this harmonize with some of these that provision harmonize with the general city code. But the general city code, and this is based on Lady Bird Johnson's Highway Beautification Act from the 1960s, I guess, is, about junkyards and junkyard screening. And I think it also would allow the natural plantings if they're planted correct, if it screens the property. So, but again, that's kind of in here for junkyard permitting on a case-by-case basis. So we just need to work that language together.
Okay, good deal.
So while we're on this item, why did we go from 8 feet to 6 feet? 6 feet's not very much.
We can go back to 8.
Let's go back to 8. That'll make it match the junkyard,
Makes sense.
and that way people won't be confused. We want to avoid confusion. Okay, is there anything else?
I still have some more,
Oh,
sorry.
you have more, I'm sorry. Well, I didn't want that one to get away.
Yeah, sorry. So on page 256, it talks about interior planting requirements for parking lots. And it talks about how parking lots containing 30 parking spaces within certain mixed-use districts shall be exempt from the 8% landscaping requirement and the median requirement. I don't know, I can't visualize all these technical stuff in my mind. My concern is, and I think what you guys are trying to address in with some of these revisions is I really hate to see parking lots that are just a sea of asphalt, you know, with not a blade of green, from here to yonder. So are we, you know, creating a standard that, compels a developer to put some plantings, you know, in their parking lots? I mean, again, you know, I'm not going to argue whether it should be 30 parking spaces or 50 parking spaces. I just want to kind of get some feedback from you guys whether or not we're moving in that direction with these revisions.
In these specific zoning areas, because space is such a hot commodity, that's why we have a decreased requirement. To your point, you know, it used to say, but shall be required to install street trees, as described below, less 50%. We still want to include the same amount of street trees. It's just the interior requirement that is decreased. To be honest, that's not a change. The only part that we changed was the decrease in the street trees. So the exempt from the 8% landscaping requirement, that was already in there, and we just left it.
Yeah, okay.
To be honest.
Counselor O'Quinn, are you saying you'd like to see that part changed?
Well, help me understand why we're striking that part out.
Because we want more trees. Because that's allowing you to have 50% less than what's prescribed along the street. And we don't want you to have 50% less, we want you to have what's prescribed.
Right, right.
But they're still
I
exempt
got it.
from the interior landscaping, but they'd have to fully comply with the perimeter trees.
Okay, I
But
got
in
it.
all other areas, we have increased the interior percentage from 8% to 10%. So we are trying to bulk that up a little bit in those other areas.
But that's the 30 parking spaces is kind of the threshold of where you, if you're above that, you start to have some interior landscaping requirement.
That's right.
Okay.
But, I mean, now's the time, if you guys think we should change that threshold, this is the time and place, if you think that's too many.
But that's, again,
Or
this
too
is
few.
just for these zoning districts. In all the other zoning districts, I think it's 20 parking spaces. Forgive me, let me see if I can find it real quick. No, I'm not gonna be able to find it.
Okay. Well, you know, a lot of this kind of comes from just like various experiences over the years. So let me share with you one of my experiences. So, Groveland Baptist Church on Fifth Avenue South, you know, near Woodlawn in the Crestwood North neighborhood. They own some lots across the street and, you know, wanted to pave those for additional parking. And their original intent was just to go in there and put some asphalt down. And fortunately, staff said, hey, look, you guys do have need to put in some landscaping and do this in a way that's appealing, and that's what happened. But I definitely want, and I think that's what should have happened. That's what the community wanted, too. But
Do you think the 30 spaces should be reduced,
I don't know.
or should it be eliminated altogether?
I'm not a parking lot expert, thank God.
Right.
But, I mean, 30 parking spaces doesn't seem like a huge parking lot to me. And if you start adding, landscaping islands, I could see how that, in that limited amount of space, could start to take up a lot of area and cause, more complexity with, trying to manage the traffic flow and that sort of thing. So anyway, let's not mess with it.
May I ask a question about the same item while you're on it? Okay, up at the top of A, it's general requirements, 30 spaces within B4, MUH, B4, and MUD. So isn't the first one B3?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then you're changing it from 8% to 10% up in that sentence, the first sentence. But then when you get down to parking lots containing fewer than 30 parking spaces in B3, MUH, blah, 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 district shall be exempt from the 8% landscaping requirement. Didn't we just change that to 10%?
That's wrong. That's a good catch. It's all the other zoning districts in the first reference have 10% of the interior of the lot to be landscaped. And B3, MUH, B4, and MUD are exempt. So the first reference that you called out should be everything else.
Okay,
I will make that change, thank you.
that's all. I just wanted to bring it up while we were on it.
Thank you.
Next.
I think that's it, actually. Yeah. Thank goodness. It's all I have for today.
Okay.
When you get to council, I might have some more questions.
Let
But
me know. I'm happy to address before if I'm allowed to do that.
Okay, well, if we see something else, because you miss stuff. I mean, we all do, and especially the later at night it gets. So, when will this be on the council agenda if we pass it today?
If you make a favorable recommendation today, we will not have time to submit it today for Tuesday, so it will be the following Tuesday. So that'd be the 27th.
Yeah, it's not an emergency.
Right. We'll set the public hearing on the 27th, and then it will be mid to late March for the actual public hearing because of our advertising requirements.
Okay. Okay, so what is the committee's pleasure?
I'll make a motion to recommend approval to the full council.
With the changes that we've made today?
Yes, with the changes.
Okay, it has been moved and properly seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So that passes unanimously, and y'all can take it away. And we'll let you know if anything else pops up.
Please do. I appreciate it.
And it'd be great if y'all have any changes to let us know before we set the public hearing, because we'll advertise the changes and then we'd have to re-advertise again if there were anything in between.
So we have to be quick. You know, and I threw a few commas and things in there, so took a few out or something. Anyway, so thank you very much. According to our agenda, it is time for us to adjourn. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.